Hi up and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. My name's Andi Jarvis, your host for today. Thank you for coming along and joining me on the show. Today we are talking about Facebook. Facebook, the company. Could be Facebook, could be Instagram, but we're looking at it through a particular lens, which is the lens of agencies. Why? Well, we've got two guests on today who are both brilliant at what they do. The main guest is Nick Baughan from Facebook. He is the UK and Ireland Director of Agencies, and that's what we're going to get into. Yes, Facebook's a huge product. Yes, we could talk about all sorts of stuff, but Nick is the Director of Agencies, and that's what we want to focus about. I know I have a lot of agencies in the audience, a lot of agencies who listen to the show regularly. Thank you for listening, and we took some of your questions and put them to Nick, and you'll hear that in a moment. First, we've got a top tip, TOPTIP. It's my favorite part of the show, and top tips are brought to you by experts. It's kind of a 90-second tip that will help you improve what you do. Gil David is back. If you've been listening, a regular listener all the way through the show, you will know that Gil produced an early top tip for us. So why have I got Gil back? Gil runs Ireland's best Facebook ad agency. He's one of the few premium partners, and he's an expert in that. He builds campaigns for e-commerce companies that scale using social media ads. Primarily that is through Facebook and their properties. So I thought we'd bring Gil back because he's the man to give you a tip that you can use in your business. So here's Gil David with our TOPTIP.
Hi guys, Gil here from Andi MG, and I'm back with another top tip to do with Facebook ads. So this is about creative testing. So however well your account's doing or not doing, you should always be spending at least, we'd always spend at least 5 to 10% of the budget on testing new ads and audiences as well. And the best way to do it is if you have a separate testing campaign, separate to your other campaigns that you're running your main ads in. And then just set up some simple ad sets. It doesn't have to be a huge budget, like I say, just even 5% of your total budget. And just be testing different ads, different creative, different copy, different videos, all that kind of stuff, just on a regular basis every week. So even if you're not spending much, you should be testing at least 2 to 3 different ads a week. And in bigger accounts, like we test probably 10 to 12 ads a week in bigger spend accounts. And that way, if your results do start dropping off from your ads and your other ad sets and your other campaigns, then you know you've got ads that you've already tested that you can put into those, and hopefully they should help keep your results up. So that's my tip for this week's podcast, creative testing a different campaign. And also means that if you are testing a separate campaign, you're not disrupting the learning or optimization on all your other main campaigns. So yeah, give it a try. So if you found that useful, give me a follow on LinkedIn, or you can connect with me on Twitter. I'm quite active on there at Gil, GIL_RunDMG. Or you can find our website. If you're an e-commerce brand wanting to scale, that's who we mainly work with. We're one of Ireland's few premier Facebook marketing partners. Just go to www.run-dmg.com and connect with us there.
Gil, thanks for your top tip. Now, without further ado, let's just get into it. You've come to listen to Nick Baughan from Facebook. Let's just hear what he has to say. Facebook. Nick, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So let's first start by, let's talk about you for a moment. Tell us, how did you get to Facebook? You didn't just wake up one morning and you were working there. Give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, I really appreciate you taking time out of your morning for this conversation. I live and I also work in North London in Highbury at the moment with my wife and my 2 kids who are mercifully going back to school next week. But in terms of how I got to Facebook, so I started working in media in the dim and distant past at a couple of media independents, Total Media, which is a fantastic business, still thriving today, and then moved to Group M, part of WPP, where I spent the kind of following 12, 13 years working across some brilliant agencies with some amazing people. So firstly at a business called MEC, Media Edge CIA, as then was, where I was a planner, then a couple of years doing new business at Mindshare. And anyone who's done new business at an agency knows how tough a job that can be. And then Lindsay Patterson was just getting going at Maxus as CEO. And Lindsay's a phenomenal leader, and she was growing the business really fast along with the COO there, Tim Irwin. And she kindly asked me to go and be MD over at Maxis, and I went and spent 5 brilliant years there as MD and then CEO. And then I think back in 2018, WPP decided to merge what was then MEC and Maxis to make Wavemaker, which is a fantastic agency today. And also at the same time, they'd acquired Essence, which was a digital media independent a couple of years before. And then they decided to expand Essence's remit to make it a kind of full service, all media agency. So I went over to Essence to run that business across Europe, Middle East and Africa, which was, again, an enormous privilege with some incredibly talented people. It's now being run by Tim Irwin, who's growing the business at a fantastic rate in Europe. And a couple of years down the line, I had the opportunity to look at a role at Facebook, and it was working with Steve Hatch, who I'd worked with at MEC before, and it felt like too interesting a role to turn down, because it was a new challenge, but it was also meant carrying on working with an agency community that I'd grown up in, that I respect and I love. And it felt just like a great mix. And 2 years down the line, I'm kind of happy to say that was absolutely the case. And as all roles do, it tended to expand a bit. So I spend a huge amount of time with our agency community, but also with the investment industries, so with venture and with private equity, with consultancies, and also spend a lot of time now with our incredible UK trade body community. Mm-hmm. So that's how I got here. Look, I mean, all told, I've been enormously privileged to work at a number of incredible businesses with a huge number of incredible people. So I do count myself extremely lucky every day.
And now, we had Katie Jackson on a couple of episodes ago. Katie is MD at TBWA London, which is an Omnicom agency. And I think a lot of my audience sort of grew up in digital agencies, not solely, but a lot of them did, where sort of big scalable digital agencies are measured, sort of 10, 15, 20, 25 million pound turnover, and are big movers and shakers in the industry. But the agencies like TBWA and the ones you've worked at, sort of Maxis and WPP agencies, are slightly different scale of agency, aren't they? They're huge organizations.
Yeah, I mean, they are very big organizations. And I think historically there was probably a much more significant divide in terms of scale and rate of growth, in that I think perhaps once upon a time, particularly in the analog world, where the cost of entry into advertising is that much higher, the billings, i.e., size of consolidated billings, were a real factor in one's ability to compete. In a scaled world, the more you spend tends to be a correlation to the price that you buy the media at. However, that's not the case so much anymore. And I think there is real advantage to agility, to flexibility, when it comes to being a smaller agency. And because there is no advantage in scale on biddable platforms like a Facebook and like a Google in terms of media pricing, realistically, it's about value that you can deliver back to your client. And if you are able to specialize, if you have deep knowledge, if you have sophistication on the platform, and you can deliver business results back to an advertiser, then the size of the parent organization is irrelevant, and you're still able to charge a really good premium for adding value back to the business. So we see a lot of digital independence growing at a very fast rate indeed. Likewise, we also see a huge step change in the sophistication of some of the bigger agency groups on our platform as well. So I think there is a really thriving, competitive industry out there, which is brilliant for all people. And I think historically, as is the same today, there's probably some ingredients that are common in all successful businesses. I think, firstly, an ability to change and adapt, and be innovative and be flexible. I think, secondly, an absolute focus on the client. I think where I've seen agencies fall over in the past is where perhaps they've become too introspective and too concerned around their own structures and taking the eye off their customer.
Yeah.
And I think, and lastly, just by far and away the most important element is the team. The agencies are a services business. There are product organizations out there. If you sell shampoo and you have shampoo coming off the end of assembly line, that's still going to happen if you have to make some changes internally, if your people aren't there. In an agency, if your people aren't there, you have no business. And therefore, getting the right people, getting a diverse team, a happy team, a team that's prepared to challenge one another, I think is absolutely the key ingredient to success. And every agency I've seen that's done well has always had that kind of alchemy of team that makes all the difference.
It's interesting, and I won't ask you to comment on this, but I know when I work with businesses, they often say, how do you pick a good agency? And I said, look, there's lots of different ways. They've got to fit with you. You've got to know they can do the work. But the one question I always want you to ask an agency, any agency, is about staff turnover. I said, because to me, it's the canary in the mine. If you work with an agency and if they're not tracking it, that's a bit of a flag. And if they are tracking it and won't tell you, that's another flag. And if they are tracking it and it's ridiculously high, that's another flag. Well, you need turnover. You need new people coming in. Undoubtedly, if it's zero, that's another worry. But if it's really, really high, or if they're not, asking that question and getting a good answer is one of the key things I look for when people are trying to recruit an agency. So that's one of the things I always advise all my clients to do when they're to recruit.
I couldn't agree more. I think, and this, I'm probably not current on this statistic, but the average industry turnover used to be something like 27-28% in agencies. Now that, as you said it, and I'm glad you said it, because turnover can be a really positive thing. If you're helping people develop in their career and they're moving on in the right way and everyone's growing and the industry's thriving and sharing talent, that can be an absolutely positive thing, as in the same way that very low turnover can be a very negative thing. I think it's the drivers of turnover that are really important. And then also, clearly if the entire senior management has turned over in the last 12 months, then there's probably something wrong there too. So I think we are looking at a more mobile workplace. I think that's only going to be more pronounced over the coming 12 to 24 months. But I agree, and I think staff churn is a really good business indicator.
Mm-hmm. And if you're okay, while we've got into agencies, it might be, or if we stick on agencies for a little bit, if that's all right, and look at that, because agencies, look, they're inherent in the Facebook business model, right? You've got millions and millions of advertisers just in the UK and Ireland alone. Millions of advertisers there. So what are the challenges and what are the benefits that you've got there? Because you sometimes hear smaller advertisers say, look, we just can't get in touch with anyone at Facebook. But with the scale of advertising, that's part of the problem, isn't it, for the organization?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And I'm going to apologise for drinking my enormous cup of tea for those people who can see it. So look, I think there's a couple of points to that question, and I think the first is the role of agencies. I think this is broadly dispelled now, but there was a period where there was this sense that somehow businesses like ours, like Google, somehow felt that agencies were frenemies or enemies, and we were somehow looking to displace them, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, it absolutely couldn't be further from the truth. Agencies are absolutely some of our most important partners. They push us to be better. They push us to ship more innovative products. They are partner. They are gatekeeper, and they're hugely important to our business model. Now, in terms of the overall numbers of businesses that we work with, just to do it at an aggregate level, so you'll be familiar with these numbers, but in terms of users, we're north of 3 billion people around the world across our apps and services. In terms of businesses, I think it's 140 million businesses on the platform, but the vast majority of whom are there on an organic basis. And I think we have something around 10, 11 million paying advertisers. So that's the kind of universe that we're talking about. So even with the best will in the world, we can't provide face-to-face coverage for every single one of those advertisers. So what we do is we invest a huge amount of money and resource in tools, in automated tools, in best practice, in education. But we also make sure that we have, in-person resource, usually over chat, in help functions when things do go wrong, because there are times when obviously people have challenges or problems with the platform or questions to ask, and therefore we have invested very heavily in our support service. So I think I had a look yesterday actually, and I think the current waiting times to speak to somebody in the help centre are kind of 2 or 3 minutes. But we are always making sure that we are providing as much resource in the shortest time possible, and to be the most effective help as we can be, because as you say, we are a very scaled business. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to the dichotomy between the older ads ecosystem, where it was really for blue chip businesses, higher cost of entry, higher cost of production, where only kind of a select few could compete, to a far more disaggregated scale decentralized business where every business can be on the platform. But that comes with its infrastructural and operational challenges that we have to continue investing in. So it's something that's always a focus for us.
And for those sort of medium and smaller agencies, what type of resources, and there is a lot out there for from Facebook that is available for these agencies. What could you signpost people to, and what services and documents and things could you point people to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let's talk more in generally, and then we'll get on to agencies. So I think the two things for all business audiences are absolutely the kind of support function, which I think is facebook.com/business/help, which is, or just search for Business Help Center for Facebook, and that's where you'll get into the kind of triage and support functions for the business. And then what we would call Blueprint, which is our business education offering. And Blueprint is a phenomenally detailed, rich platform for learning that covers everything from very granular kind of marketing developer qualifications through to marketing science, through to more straightforward basics, planning and buying on the platform. So that's for anyone across the business. When it comes to agencies, clearly there are agencies we have direct relationships with. Where that's not possible, then it's absolutely worth going on to facebook.com/agency, which takes you to a program which effectively allows you to sign up to Facebook as an agency and allows us to recognize the business. And then what that platform does is it gives you access again to a lot more specific best practice, which is more kind of germane and relevant to the agency category. Again, provides a kind of way into support and just effectively starts that journey. So if you're starting up an agency today, then by signing up to that platform and kind of logging on your business manager as an agency one, it allows us to make sure that we're supporting you with the right level of resource at every stage in your journey until, hence down the line, 10 years, you're a thriving business of thousands of people. That's the ambition.
Yeah, brilliant. And we'll put links to all of those things that Nick's just mentioned in the show notes. So just have a look around where you're listening. You can click on them, go straight to those platforms and sign up. Because I think it's trying, sometimes just having that signposting to those resources is really helpful. I know when we spoke before and you mentioned about the agency thing, it wasn't something I was aware of. So just having that door open to know, right, okay, let's go and look there, register, and we can pick up from there. Yeah. What about in agency world? What are you seeing in terms of specialisms and agencies are cyclical, right? You go through agencies that do everything through to hyper specialized agencies and then back to agencies that do everything. Are you seeing any trends from the agencies that are doing well on Facebook and the way that they're approaching specialization?
It's a really interesting insight there, Andy. The kind of ebb and flow of specialism to generalism and localism to globalism, and we do see those kind of currents that play out on a slightly longer term basis. I think what we're seeing right now, and we probably have been seeing for the last couple of years and probably will see for the next few years, is a bias towards specialism. Mm-hmm. And I think that is absolutely correct. Now, I think for any business, whether it's an advertiser or an agency, there has to come a point where you do generalize. And I think increasingly that's at a measurement basis. So there needs to be an individual or a team that's empowered in the business that understands the dynamics of cross-channel media, who can then make effective channel allocation choices based on incrementality or aggressive modeling or whatever it might be. But that's the layer in the organization that needs to understand cross-media. It's the efficacy bit. I think once you're into execution, I really don't think you can specialize too much. And I think where somebody has a hand in business manager or paid social, probably at the broadest, trying to get them to then stretch across to search, for example, I think is asking too much to then charge a premium to an advertiser, because they're just, the rate at which we ship product innovation, new products, new opportunities, means that trying to cover everything at an executional level across paid social, across all the platforms in paid social, so TikTok, Snap, and then onto Google as well, it just feels like far too great a stretch at an executional level. So I think where we're seeing agencies winning is nearly always where they have a deep specialism, and where they're subsequently able to take that specialism and diversify across revenue streams. And that is very hard to provide new products and new services at a generalist level, because effectively it just becomes a question of where does the resource sit. Whereas you have that deep specialism, if you really understand the nuance on the platforms, then it is easier. You're up to date, you're current, and it becomes a really valuable service. So I would always advocate, and I see far more success from businesses who are specializing than businesses who are taking a more generalist executional approach.
I think maybe that's something I see in agencies too, in that the difference between a small to medium-sized agency and a large one is often the bigger ones have somebody sat in, or a team of people sat in on reporting, on analysis, data analysts or whatever they call them, who are looking at reporting across. Whereas if you come to smaller performance marketing agencies, they'll often call themselves, they will be hands-on, and they may have specialists in Google and in social ads or whatever. But at a reporting level, they're trying to mark their own homework, or trying to report across two things when they need to make one of them look better for their own individual specialism. So it's interesting that once you get to that bigger level, they do take that more global approach to reporting. And I think it's important that we do that, because we're drowned by stats in marketing at the minute, certainly in performance and in ads. And that you've got to be able to objectively pull out the best ones to report on the campaigns, not just, as I say, mark your own homework, which I think still happens a little bit in some agencies, some smaller agencies. But look, it's unfair to ask you to comment on that, so I'll move on. Listen, let's talk a little bit more about Facebook product and some of the issues and some of the headwinds and things that the product comes across. Because regulation, in terms of, is something of interest to lots of people, but specifically in agencies and advertisers. Some of the regulation that's been talked about will affect them particularly. So what's Facebook's, or your view in terms of the regulation coming to the industry?
Yeah, so this is a pretty expansive topic, Andy, as I know you know. So I might talk a couple of minutes on this, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So at a general level, regulation is a good thing. So we've been very clear for the last 2 years that the internet needs more rules, more regulation, and we're not standing still waiting for it. And I can maybe come on some of that later. But I think last year, this year, next year are when we're actually going to see these new rules come into place. And there is a huge amount of activity in policy and regulation in standards around the internet. And as I say, this is broadly a positive development. I think it is very easy to conflate regulation. So a lot of people sort of talk about regulation as a kind of amorphous mass. I'm not sure is completely helpful. I think it's more helpful to try and split it out into different and relevant areas of regulation. I think, to answer your question squarely, I think there are probably 4 different types of regulation that are particularly relevant to us, our agencies, our advertisers, and I think those are content, I think there's competition, I think there's privacy, and I think there's ads, all of which are really important areas of regulation and busy in their own right. So if we can kind of dip a little bit into each of those, if that would be helpful.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
I think probably the busiest at the moment is content regulation, and it's also it can be quite helpful to look at geographies. So when it comes to content, clearly there's no such thing as a kind of global regulator or global government to set standards, which, given the kind of different mores and attitudes in different markets, it obviously makes a lot of sense. The first time we probably see meaningful regulation here is around regional level within EMEA. So this is obviously the EU. So, they are looking at the Digital Services Act, which is going to be kind of governing online content standards and things like takedown time. So if there's contravening content, how quickly is a platform removing it? And then I think if we look closest home, then the government is just moving on to the next stages of its online harms consultation, having done the white paper and issued some of the first recommendations. And what that's going to see is Ofcom take responsibility for social media in the UK. And this is a really positive development. Ofcom provide a gold standard regulatory framework for broadcast and have done for a very long time. Press obviously sits in a self-regulatory environment. So that's content. So there's a huge amount going on there, which will change dramatically over the next 12 months. I think in competition, you've then got again the EU. I think are doing the Digital Markets Act, and that looks to create the most pro-competition market possible across the EU. And in the UK, that's being looked at by the Competitions and Markets Authority, the CMA, who have set up the Digital Markets Unit. It's a lot of quite similar language in a lot of these organisations. And again, the remit here is to make this market as pro-competition as it possibly can be within ads and digital advertising. And that's clearly going to be a body that we're going to be engaged with on a heavy basis, I think. And then once we get into privacy, again closest to home, that's mainly going to come under the auspices of the CMA again and the Digital Markets Unit, which is being set up at the moment. The EU have already enshrined their position on this through the general directive. And then you've probably got the more controversial position of Apple sitting as more of a kind of unelected global regulator for privacy across their ecosystem, obviously not across other people's ecosystems. Yeah. And then I think so. Lastly, then I think ads. That is worth a mention. Often gets overlooked, which is odd given the industry that we work in. So the Advertising Standards Authority is the organisation that regulates ads across all channels, all media types. Now, for broadcast, it's a co-regulatory organisation with Ofcom. For non-broadcast, it's self-regulatory. And then occasionally also the government will seek to legislate on a statutory basis for areas like HFSS, which is obviously a current topic. But it's always, I think, very important to note that the OSA covers all channels. So that's where we are, I think, on a broader regulation perspective. I mean, as I say, this is the next 12 to 24 months, I think, is going to be a time of huge development and progress and change here. We're not standing still waiting for it. I'm sure we'll talk about community standards as perhaps later, but we have invested billions of dollars, and we continue to do so every year in content, in terms of community standards and policy. We have north of 35,000 people working in this space. And if I always follow that adage that if you want to know what's important to a business, then you look where it's spending its money. And integrity is where we spend a huge amount of money and resource. But likewise, we try to innovate here. So as I said at the beginning, when it comes to content, there is no such thing as a global, content regulator. We've engaged in what I think is one of the most innovative, pioneering forms of self-regulation that I've seen through the creation of the Independent Oversight Board. So this was 20 individuals taken from mainly judiciary, journalism, NGOs, government, represented I think in the UK by Alan Rushbridge, who's the ex-editor of The Guardian. And they will then recruit an additional 20 members themselves. So just to really make that independence pronounced from Facebook. They are empowered to make content decisions on individual cases that are binding, i.e. Facebook can't overturn them, Mark can't overturn them, that they are completely independent in their judgment. And they are also empowered to make policy recommendations to changes, which they are already doing. And I think this is going to be, it's a heavily scrutinized exercise, but I think one of the most far-reaching innovations in global media regulation that's been, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that group develops over the coming years.
Yeah, and Facebook, as you mentioned, are engaged in all those different regulatory pillars, I suppose, at levels, talking to that, and that's sometimes perceived in the media as Facebook trying to shape the regulation, but that's not what it is it? It's more just you talk to all the stakeholders. The government has a responsibility to talk to all the stakeholders as they start to shape up the policy.
Absolutely, and I don't think we'd be doing our job properly if we weren't engaging with policymakers on regulation. Ultimately, it's going to be down to policymakers to set policy. However, we will always have a perspective on what we think is sensible regulation, and we are always asked for input into that kind of policy creation. So absolutely, I think it's right and proper that we put a perspective forward, and then it's down to the regulators to develop policy as they see fit.
Mm-hmm. No problem. Now, those four areas you mentioned, we could probably do a whole podcast on each one of them, and probably some more as well on that. But looking at sort of the things that I think might be relevant to advertisers and things like that are brand safety. It is a big issue for lots of people. So you've done a lot at Facebook in terms of brand safety, but what I'm talking for people who don't book ads, looking at your content and your ads appearing next to content that might not be matching what your brand values, basically, and that can be harmful content. Sometimes it just might be places you don't want to be. So what Facebook done to help advertisers with that type of content and that approach?
Yeah. So brand safety is obviously legitimately towards the top of every marketer's, every advertiser's priority list. And I think there's two or three areas to touch on here. The first is that when it comes to our platform, making the platform safe for consumers is the best way to ensure a brand safe environment for advertisers. And that absolutely sits at the heart of our approach here. So this is what I referred to earlier as community standards. Mm-hmm. So for those people who aren't aware of how we develop standards, so over the course of Facebook's history, we've developed policy and standards across multiple themes and areas, and the standards are developed by policy experts, generally in conjunction with NGOs and subject matter experts, to make sure that we have the most robust set of policies available. And they cover all sorts of spheres. So we're talking things like terrorism or hate speech or nudity, kind of any contravening areas on our platform have standards against them. And those standards are completely available for scrutiny. So anyone can look at those standards in complete detail. So it's important to have the community standards, but it's even more important to enforce against them. And for the advertiser community, it's even more important to know how well we're enforcing against them. So once a quarter, we release something called the Community Standards Enforcement Report, which again is available for public scrutiny. And what that does is, in the most granular level possible, looks at over the previous quarter how much content was on the platform in those kinds of areas that I referred to earlier. I think there's 12 areas for Facebook and 10 for Instagram. And it then goes into a lot of detail as to what the prevalence is, i.e. how frequently are we seeing that kind of content on the platform, how much actual volume of content was taken down, how much of that taken down content was appealed, and therefore how much was reinstated on appeal. And really, I think is the gold standard for platform transparency. So certainly over the last 12 months, I think hate speech was a real focus for the platform and for advertisers. So I think for the last 2 quarters, we've been able to publish a prevalence score. I think the quarter before last, the prevalence of hate speech on the platform was 0.1%. So that's roughly 10 pieces of content for every 10,000 in on view. In the last quarter, we were able to bring that down to, I think, 0.07 to 0.08%, so 7 or 8 pieces of content for every 10,000. And what that does is it gives advertisers a currency, a metric, and we are completely upfront about that, and we go into a great deal of detail as to why we are there and why we've made improvements or why we've gone backwards, and that's critically important to be for our advertisers and our agencies to judge us against. So those are the community standards, and as I say, that's the most important thing for our business to get right. So then it gets a little bit more detail in terms of placements. So for certain placements, generally the more contextual ones like instant articles, audience network, in-stream, we have a very standard and sophisticated suite of tools to allow for exclusion lists and contextual limitations that other platforms as well offer as well. We work with a range of third parties in this space, and it's overall a very sophisticated brand safety environment, and we continue to evolve that over time. For feed, so the feed portion of our ads business, historically that has absolutely been governed by community standards. We are in the process of running a very limited test with a very small group of advertisers for brand contextual controls in feed. Now it's a very significant engineering task because we classify content by feed, and everybody's feed is completely different. So this is it's a trial that we're taking incredibly seriously, and therefore there's a lot of scrutiny. It will roll out reasonably slowly over the next 12 to 18 months. But that is something that we are exploring, as I say, with a small group of control advertisers to begin with.
And that sounds like a really interesting development, though, in terms of where feed advertising could go, because it sounds like it starts in a brand safety place, but could actually, contextual advertising in feed is a really interesting development, I suppose, from an advertiser's perspective.
It's a really interesting development, and one that, as I say, we're taking very seriously, and one that we need to make sure that we're getting right for our users and for our advertisers. Yeah. So I think watch this space for more development over the coming months.
Definitely. I mean, even you said it's a significant engineering challenge. I'm just, as we're talking, trying to even imagine the scale of that engineering challenge is making my head hurt. Given, how, as I say, everyone's feed is individualized, and the number of factors that go into deciding that and trying to listen. That, which is why I'm not an engineer. I'm a marketer, because I can't. My brain can't compute that. So that, from a sort of safety point of view, that's driving the product forward, and the product, you said, is being driven forward. The ad product is being driven forward by agencies and advertisers pushing you for new things. You're also being pushed by competition, driving you forward. So in the last, if we'd have done this interview 2 years ago, nobody would be saying, are you worried about TikTok taking your advertisers? Because nobody would be, what's a TikTok? Would be that sort of discussion. So it was Snapchat before that, and there's there's always a new competitor, coming in, trying to hoover up some of your ad money. I suppose, is that a concern, or are you do you take more that approach that when Channel 5 launched, it didn't kill advertising on ITV or Channel 4. Generally speaking, the pie just got bigger. So is competition welcomed by you? Is it, does it cause sort of furrowed brows at Facebook? How is it viewed?
So look, I mean, I think the first thing I'd say here is it's not our ad money. It's the advertisers' ad money, and they'll put that money where they think it's going to work hardest. And I think at a general basis, we absolutely welcome competition. I think there's sometimes a bit of a lazy narrative that's been allowed to develop, and you've touched on it there, which is somehow that ad revenue always has to be directly substitutional. So if Instagram's doing well, then Snap's not doing so well, or if TikTok's doing well, then Facebook's not doing so well, and the market doesn't work like that. The ability to grow the overall market is completely contingent on a healthy industry, and we compete on a number of levels across a number of different spheres, whether it's for broad share of wallet or share of mind with broadcasters and publishers, whether it's at a far more paid social basis with TikTok or with Snap or with Pinterest or Twitter. There is a huge and very vibrant market out there, and a vibrant market and a competitive market pushes us all to do better. And for us, for businesses like ours, that's about shipping product. It's about innovation. Mm-hmm. And Facebook's never been a business to sit back on its laurels for a second. We know really well that if we don't invent the next iteration of Facebook, then somebody else will. And therefore, it's absolutely critically important for us to innovate. And we have been innovating at an extraordinarily fast rate in terms of product, particularly over the last 12 months. And more people have turned to our platforms, in order to maintain their community, in order to keep in touch with people. And we've invested, phenomenal resource into, improving our community tools and making sure that we're staying up to date with demand. So, is competition good? Absolutely. Just forces us all to be better. And I think, you certainly don't see any furrowed brows. I mean, there's plenty of furrowed brows for other reasons, but I don't think.
Big business, isn't it? There's always furrowed brows about something.
I've got lots more lines than I used to.
and that drive of innovation in the ad products that are coming through, is that, how much of that is driven by internal good ideas, and how much of that is driven by, agencies and advertisers saying it would be lovely if we could do? I know I've simplified the process a little bit there, but is it just a little bit of both going on?
Yes, it's definitely a little bit of both. We have teams whose role it is to be the voice of sales and engineering, and the voice of engineering and sales, so that there's always that dialogue going on between our partners and our product teams to make sure that we're shaping Facebook's suite of apps and services for the future. And we absolutely rely on input from third parties, and that can be at a product level, but it can also be at a very granular brand safety level. And what I can't say is that we hear sensible feedback and we can turn around a product change in the space of a week. Sometimes these things take time, but ours is a good business at listening. And I think if we weren't responsive to consumer or business feedback, then we probably wouldn't be as successful as a business as we are now. So the challenge for Facebook is, as we grow in size in terms of number of people, is to try and be as fast and as quick and as agile and as reactive as we can be to development. But I think we've maintained a pretty good balance so far. If the rate of product development over the last 12 months is anything to go by, then I think we're definitely doing a good job.
I would say probably in terms of the excitement that new products have generated in the market, it's been a while since I've heard as many agencies and business owners as excited about e-commerce coming to Instagram in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
It's probably been the most exciting development that people are waiting for or wanting to jump into for the last couple of years, I would say, because it's got a scale and attraction that something like TikTok maybe doesn't have yet for businesses, and much more sort of it's just a natural place for product great and purchase, and that path to purchase, and businesses see that and feel the excitement for it. So can we expect to see more in that space coming from your end? I know you're not a product owner as such, but is that sort of a direction that is coming and a big priority for the company?
Yes, definitely. So I think I make a general point before, which is really relevant for the types of partners that we work with, whether that be agencies or venture or consultancies. In that, I think the best possible shift for Facebook has been the perception from provider of ad inventory to provider of sales, and that is it's a really critical nuance, and we're not there with every partner that we work with yet, but certainly across large portions of the advertiser and marketing services industries, I think we've made that shift from being a cost center to a profit center. And that is, that's completely critical for the success of our business, and even more critical, it's important for the success of all the businesses that work with us. One of our core strategies is to grow our own business by growing other people's businesses, and that's more and more appetite in the small business landscape as well, where we offer an extraordinarily efficient way, an effective way for small businesses to reach audiences, to help people discover their brands and their services and to grow. And that word discovery is really, really important here. And I think we'll be talking a lot more about what we call discovery commerce over the next 12 months. And I think that breaks down into a couple of areas. Clearly, we've seen this absolutely massive shift in e-commerce adoption over the last 12 months, and this kind of common theme of squeezing maybe 5 years of development into 12 months or perhaps 10 years. However, I think we'd look at discovery in probably a couple of levels. The first is the similar advertising tools that we've had and developed and evolved over the last years, which allow big businesses, small businesses to have their products discovered, to be able to reach relevant and personalized audiences, and that kind of commerce economy engine that Facebook has become, which has been able to deliver so much back to domestic GDPs, particularly in the small business environment. But beyond the kind of ads ecosystem, it's also about fulfillment. So we've launched things like Instagram Shop and Facebook Shop. And what these allow us to do is just effectively give a really seamless retail experience for businesses of all sizes. So historically, if we're on a platform and you'd see an ad and you click through to the ad, you'd usually get sort of taken over some kind of slightly janky landing page, which wasn't in the least bit tailored to you as an individual or your purchase. Whereas by doing that in the same platform, businesses are able to actually keep the experience incredibly streamlined and frictionless, but also completely tailored to the individual, and just lose those massive drop-offs that you get from taking people off site and a really suboptimal experience. And then I think lastly, as part of that is just the ability to engage more. So we whether it's Messenger or WhatsApp, the ability for businesses to engage with customers is critical. I mean, you and I were both speaking just before we got started today about our experience with big telco engineering teams at our houses to fix the Wi-Fi, and on my experience, I did the whole thing over chat, and it was so much more or so much less painful than dial 2, dial 3.
Your call is important to us. Please hold for another 45 minutes.
And it's just so much more seamless. And I think that combination of this discovery, ads, and signal, I think the fulfillment process and then the ability to have a low touch but really efficient engagement model through chat is what's really going to make the difference to commerce in the next 12 months.
Mm-hmm. No, brilliant. So, and that's it. And I think it allows, there's a democratization, I think, of being able to offer slicker services. You know, people buying online now are used to Amazon's level of service and expect that everywhere. And so these tools can, if they can help businesses not necessarily compete with Prime, because that's difficult to do, but it can help you compete on response times and customer service and slickness of experience. And I think it's a positive generally.
Look, I think if there's one theme that ties together a lot of what we've talked about in the last hour, it's democratization. It's about the ability to bring tools, services, advertising experiences to consumers and businesses at low cost or no cost or efficient cost in an ecosystem that never existed before. And that's why we feel pretty passionate about ads and the value exchange for ads, is it allows us to effectively democratize business. And I don't just mean locally. You know, the ads revenue model, I'll go off at a slight tangent here, but the ads revenue model that we have globally, I think is genuinely progressive, because what it allows us to do is allows us to take ads revenue from developed markets like the UK and the US and take that revenue and provide our services and our apps for free in developing markets. And that in turn then stimulates those economies. And I think that kind of virtuous circle of being able to recycle developed ads revenue into developing markets it's incredibly powerful. It's one that often goes overlooked. But it's the reason why historically in a sector in media that's been more domestic than autos or financial services or whatever, that the globalized media markets and the value exchange from platforms is really powerful because it does allow us that kind of recycling dynamic. As I say, a slight tangent, but I think the democratization element here is really fascinating, and it sits absolutely at the heart of what we're trying to do in terms of building community.
And I think it's really great to get the Facebook perspective on that and hear, that globalized view effectively, of what you do. And sometimes it can be difficult when you're an agency sitting in Belfast, in Bradford, in Birmingham, or anywhere else beginning with B in the UK, looking at dealing with the challenges or the problems you have internally for your clients. But this is a global business looking at these things globally. Yeah. So it's interesting to hear that perspective. Just aware of the time, so I have two wrap-up questions which I ask everybody who's on the show, and you're not getting away without being asked them, Nick. So here we go. In terms of books or podcasts or newsletters that you sign up to, there's a page on my website which is eximomarketingstrategy.com/reading-list. Again, there's a link in the show notes, just go and click on that. Every guest who's on gets asked what do they recommend. It's all kept on that page so you can have a look. What's your sort of reading of choice, Nick, or where do you go to stay abreast with the industry?
I'm going to be a massive disappointment to you, Andy, I'm afraid, in that I think especially over the last 12 months, I've tried to keep the line between home and work incredibly clear. So obviously during the day I don't have an enormous amount of time to read, but I would say, back to our competition point, I do rely on Twitter, I think, to keep me most abreast of kind of industry developments. I often follow links on Twitter to some of the people that I follow there that kind of I trust to keep me educated and on top of things. Mm-hmm. But after the laptop closes, then it's generally fiction. So I think I subscribe to The Economist, which I really enjoy and tend to read at the weekend. But no, it tends to be fiction after the day ends. At the moment, I am reading, and it's on my desk, a very interesting book, a very small book, called The War of the Poor by an incredible French author called Eric Vuillard, who wrote, I'm reading this because I read his previous one, which was also a very small book, called The Order of the Day, which was about the origins of the war in Germany. And he just writes beautifully. I mean, it's probably only 50, 80 pages long, but you come out of it feeling
Wow.
like you've read something much larger. This one's about a preacher called Thomas Müntzer, which was a part of the Reformation, and it's an incredible, absolutely incredible read.
Excellent. And the next podcast after this one, I've already recorded it, and the guest on that is Stuart Robertson, the guy who invented 2020 cricket.
Oh wow!
And he gave me a cookbook. He said, I honestly said, I stopped reading marketing books years ago. I'm currently reading. He gave me a cookbook and a fiction as well. So yeah, look, it's always.
Well, there's a theme there, isn't there? I mean, I've gone to scratch cooking a lot over the course of the lockdown, really just to stretch the days out. So we're making a lot of pasta at the moment and doing a lot of sushi and that sort of thing, just because it soaks up the hours, right?
And you've got it plays to a different side of your brain. You know, I've much like you, I've cut down business books. I always used to switch between. I read one business, one fiction, just because there's only so many self-help guru books you can read, right?
I agree.
Although I'm currently reading Obama's book. Yeah, I mean, I'll be on it for the next 3 years. I think it's a monster, but
it's a different size book, isn't it?
It is, but he's another beautiful writer, and it's not ghostwritten as well, which I like that. So
makes a difference, doesn't it?
He's got excellent. And look, my last question then. What question do you usually get asked that I haven't asked?
Well, it's probably is a bit pedestrian, but I normally get asked, what's my favorite ad? That normally comes up when I'm talking about Facebook and advertising, those kinds of things. So that would be the only question that I think is probably conspicuous in its absence.
Go on then, give us a quick answer for that. Then what is your favorite ad?
Well, so my favorite campaign it's a really niche one, which was an Adnams campaign. I think it was called Beer by the Coast. It's a small actually quite large Norfolk-based brewery now. I think Norfolk, if it's not Suffolk. And they just did the most beautiful, I think it was an agency called Campbell Doyle Dye, and they just did the most beautiful artwork for it. If you look up Adnams Beer by the Coast, you'll see it, and it's just so wonderful and so evocative, and it would played out beautifully on Facebook. But unfortunately, this was well before I think it was even invented. But that one, for some reason, has always absolutely stuck in my head. In terms of actually who I think is doing brilliant work on Facebook, I go back to The Economist, who actually they always stick out to me as one of our best advertisers. They get it right every single time. I find their copy is always really intriguing. I mean, I'm I like the brand, so I'm predisposed to like their ads. But it's they're a fantastic advertiser on the platform. But yes, I wish the Adnams campaign was still going, because it's such a lovely bit of artwork.
I do look, and I've talked to several people from agency world on this podcast, and will continue to do. But I am thinking maybe like a Christmas episode of just getting a load of old ad agency execs and getting them talking about some of the old ads. I think there's some classics out there that I don't want them to die. I think there's some brilliant ones that we could roll back out and talk about forever. So that might be Christmas time this year.
Couldn't agree more. I'm in.
Brilliant. Nick, thank you very much for your time. And thank you everyone for listening. Cheers.